Welcome to Tradition and Sanity. 5 poems every Catholic should memorize. Catholic verse at its best and most diverse. By Julian Kwasniewski. Read by the author. In his short book on the spiritual life, We Live with Our Eyes Open, the English Benedictine Hubert van Zeller comments that what most of us need to cultivate is the innocent eye which is not ashamed to open in wonder. End quote. We open ourselves up to sloth and listlessness when we lose our ability to get lost in wonder. Quote, the too inquiring mind is obviously more of a liability than an asset, but the mind which is too listless to inquire might just as well not exist at all. Wonder, which goes hand in hand with curiosity, is a key to keeping our eyes open to the beauties of both the natural life and the supernatural life. Again, Van Zeller says, quote, hardly surprising that Christ so often gave us children as our models. To the child there is nothing commonplace, nothing which cannot be vested with some sort of interest. Even if we can't welcome the normal with a glad cry of surprise, there is no reason why we should deny it the beauty which belongs to it. Beauty jumps out of the dustbin if you let it. End quote. I believe that the cultivation of wonder, of a desire to be more and more open to the marvel of what is one of the primary reasons we ought to read and memorize poetry. If Dom Hubert is right, we need a mental and spiritual ointment to rub on our stiffened imaginations and limber them up again, so that our hearts do indeed leap up when we behold a rainbow in the sky. Whatever his other issues, at least Wordsworth's childlike wonder perdured into his older years. So it was when my life began, so it is now I am a man, so be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. The poet's task could be put this way, then, to capture beauty whenever he sees it jump out of the dustbin, or sock drawer, or rotten forest log, or crimson-lined sunset cloud, and remind others to look there themselves. The marvelous thing about poetry is that it allows us to get in on another's moment of wonder, and then we have a little piece of his wonder to view the world through. Imagine each great poem you learn as if it is a sliver of stained glass. Once your pocket is full of them, you have many lenses you can view the world through. Sometimes the colored glass accents or reveals certain features of the view you couldn't or didn't see before. Sometimes they make visible objects you couldn't see without them. Other times they hide things from view so that you can see how much better or worse off the scene might be with only one item. When you share these shards of glass with others, you begin to have a common language of vision and interpretation. Even though you may notice differences, viewing the same scenes through beautiful shards of glass gives a commonality to different viewers' experiences. I believe this phenomenon of shared experience, shared underlining and highlighting of wonder, is one of the important reasons everyone should learn, love, and share poetry. Through the artistry of the poet, one also begins to have better ways of describing shared experience. The words, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky, is both more descriptive of the experience of seeing a rainbow and more memorable. In this piece, I'd like to draw attention to 5 specifically Catholic poems which deserve to be common panes of stained glass among us. Many poems could have been chosen for an article with a title like this one, and while my list is certainly not definitive, I'll still explain my rationale in choosing these 5. I chose to limit myself to poems composed in English. Translations of poetry can be decent, but they are never as successful as the originals. We might lament the dearth of good English writers who were also Catholic. Ronald Knox and John Senior, among others, complained that English has been for so long a Protestant language, spoken in predominantly Protestant cultures, that it lacks the Catholic riches of some other languages. For instance, St. Thomas Aquinas' hymns in Latin, or Dante's comedy in Italian, or St. John of the Cross's mystical verses in Spanish, or the rhapsodies of Charles Péguy and Paul Claudel in French. I wish I could include one of the metaphysical poets, even perhaps a stanza of Milton, but they do not belong to the fold. As it is, two of my most famous authors are converts from Anglicanism. Lead, kindly light. This famous hymn was written by the young Newman on his trip to Italy in 1833. He wrote, "We were becalmed for the whole week in the Straits of Bonifacio, and it was there I wrote the lines, 'Lead, kindly light,' which have since become so well known." First entitled "The Pillar of the Cloud," the verses were published in British Magazine the following year, and set to music in 1869 to the tune Lux Benigna, specifically composed for these words by John Bacchus Dykes. The text acquired multiple other popular tunes over the years, and continues to be sung to various melodies today. It became wildly popular, and has found its way around the world, being sung by survivors of the Titanic as they escaped the sinking ship, by miners trapped inside a mine shaft in 1909, and by British troops in World War I, to name just a few. It found its way into a novel by Thomas Hardy, and its opening line is the motto for schools as far-flung as the UAE and India. Lead, kindly light, amidst the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home, lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet, I do not ask to see the distant scene, one step enough for me. I was not ever thus, nor prayed that thou shouldst lead me on. I loved to choose and see my path, but now lead thou me on. I loved the garish day, and, spite of fears, pride ruled my will. Remember not past years. So long thy power hath blessed me, sure it still will lead me on, o'er moor and fen, o'er crag and torrent, till the night is gone, and with the morn those angel faces smile, which I have loved long since, and lost awhile. If it's good enough for school children in the UAE, sinking Titanic passengers and coal miners, it's good enough for me. Its most piercing theological theme is that of not being able to see the totality of God's plan, but learning to be content with seeing just one step at a time. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. I fear that beautiful English like this is becoming more and more unintelligible to our contemporaries, simply because it uses slightly archaic sentence construction and vocabulary. Since few people read assiduously, our glorious English language is not learned at a level above that of tweets and news stories, which, alas, is not a very high level. If we want to continue to be able to read, speak, and especially think at a high level, we must embrace the study of the liberal arts. Too few Catholics today are properly educated, and this limits their ability to love the beautiful arts their predecessors in faith produced. So, read, speak aloud, listen to, memorize the poetry, learn the books, music, and art of the Western tradition. Otherwise, darkness. The kindly light of God's grace has also produced the kindly light of philosophy and the arts and all that we term culture in our world. To be sure, a new dark age is already upon us. What is in our hands, however, is how dark it will be, at least for us, and whether or not we will be among the pockets of light that will shine, nevertheless. The Blessed Virgin compared to the air we breathe. Hopkins is in some way the Catholic poet. Newman wrote some fine poems, but he was not a poet primarily. Chesterton was Catholic, but he is not especially known for his verse, which is quirky rather than great. Belloc wished to be remembered above all as a poet, but whether it is chance or the quality of his verse, History remembers him more as a historian and essayist. Tolkien was a Catholic, but his mythic poems were not directly about Catholic topics. Lewis wasn't Catholic, but almost sometimes. Jared Manley Hopkins, though, was a poet through and through. He agonized over his innovative writing. His genius was such that he invented new poetic forms based on his concept of sprung rhythm, intended to reflect the flowing quality of speech rather than the pounding footfall of iambic pentameter. Hopkins' sprung rhythm consists of 1 to 4 syllable feet that start with a stressed syllable. In his masterpiece on the Virgin Mary, we hear his verses tumbling over each other like a brook in springtime, full of new snowmelt. It was written in May 1883 for the celebration of May Day at Stonyhurst College, where Hopkins was teaching Latin and Greek. It's really hard to know what to say of such a great work besides, read it and memorize it. I'll make a few comments after the poem. For now, keep your eyes and ears peeled for the technique of enjambment, where the end of one line runs straight into the next without any punctuation. This necessitates careful attention to the meaning of the text, revealed through careful inflection when recited aloud. Wild air, world-mothering air, nestling me everywhere, that each eyelash or hair girdles, goes home betwixt the fleeciest, frailest fixed snowflake, that's fairly mixed with riddles and is rife in every least thing's life, this needful, never spent, and nursing element, my more than meat and drink, my meal at every wink, this air which by life's law my lung must draw and draw, now but to breathe its praise, minds me in many ways of her who not only gave God's infinity dwindled to infancy, welcome in womb and breast, birth, milk, and all the rest, but mothers each new grace that does now reach our race. Mary Immaculate, merely a woman, yet whose presence, power is great as no goddess's was deemed, dreamed, who this one work has to do, let all God's glory through, God's glory which would go through her and from her flow off, and no way but so. I say that we are wound with mercy round and round, as if with air. The same is Mary, more by name. She, wild web, wondrous robe, mantles the guilty globe, since God has let dispense her prayers his providence. Nay, more than almoner, the sweet alm's self is her, and men are meant to share her life as life does air. If I have understood, she holds high motherhood towards all our ghostly good, and plays in grace her part about man's beating heart, laying like air's fine flood the death dance in his blood. Yet no part but what will be Christ our Saviour still. Of her flesh he took flesh. He does take fresh and fresh, though much the mystery how, not flesh but spirit now, and makes, oh marvellous, new Nazareths in us, where she shall yet conceive him, morning, noon, and eve, new Bethlehems, and he born there, evening, noon, and morn, Bethlehem or Nazareth, men here may draw like breath more Christ and baffle death, who, born so, comes to be new self and nobler me, in each one and each one more makes, when all is done, both God's and Mary's Son. Again, look overhead, how air is azure red. Oh, how, nay, do but stand where you can lift your hand skywards. Rich, rich it laps round the forefinger gaps, yet such a sapphire shot charge, steeped, sky will not stain light. Yea, mark you this, it does no prejudice. The glass blue days are those when every color glows, each shape and shadow shows. Blue be it. This blue heaven the 7 or 7 times 7 hued sunbeam will transmit, perfect, not alter it. Or if there does some soft, on things aloof aloft, bloom breathe, That one breath more earth is the fairer for. Whereas did air not make this bath of blue and slake his fire, the sun would shake, a blear and blinding ball with blackness bound, and all the thick stars round him roll, flashing like flecks of coal, quartz fret, or sparks of salt, in grimy vasty vault. So God was God of old. A mother came to mold those limbs like ours, which are what must make our day star much dearer to mankind, whose glory bare would blind, or less would win man's mind. Through her we may see him made sweeter, not made dim, and her hand leaves his light, sifted to suit our sight. Be thou then, O thou dear mother, my atmosphere, my happier world wherein to wend and meet no sin. Above me, round me lie, fronting my froward eye with sweet and scarless sky. Stir in my ears, speak there of God's love, O live air, of patience, penance, prayer. World mothering air, air wild, wound with thee, in thee isled, fold home, fast fold thy child. Mary's color of blue appears throughout in the sustained metaphor of the Mother of God as the sky which mantles the world. This is a remarkable portrayal of the almost dogma of Mary as mediatrix of all graces. Does the air interfere with the sunlight? No. Through her we may see him made sweeter, not made dim, and her hand leaves his light, sifted to suit our sight. Would the sunlight be much good without the atmosphere? Again, no. If air did not make this bath of blue and slake his fire, the sun would shake a blear and blinding ball with blackness bound. Rather than distracting us from God, as the Protestants fear, Mary, this blue heaven, transmits and perfects 7 or 7 times 7 the sunbeams of Christ's grace. Mary is not only mediatrix of grace, but in some way the gift itself. More than almoner, the sweet alm's self is her, since she draws mankind to God. The longest of the poems in my list of 5, I believe this one is perhaps the most worthwhile to memorize. Join me in the endeavor. The Pelagian Drinking Song. Time for a comedic interlude. Hilaire Belloc, 1870 to 1953, was a great friend of G.K. Chesterton, and as far as my study of both of them has shown me, he was the more scholarly of the two. It's a big claim, I know, but whereas Chesterton was a journalist who dashed off verse as he was able and wrote the occasional history book based on a general knowledge of the topic, Belloc carefully researched his many detailed historical studies, which included his 1912 monumental History of England in 11 volumes, co-authored with John Lingard, of which I've read his shorter, that is, 670-page single-volume condensation. Chesterton would never have had the patience to research and write such a work. I'm not sure about his poetry writing process, but while it certainly contains some gems, such as the Ballad of the White Horse, many verses appear to be dashed off like Chesterton's journalism. Even the Ballad of the White Horse has come under heavy fire from no less a man of letters than Tolkien. My favorite Belloc poem is among the drinking songs he wrote. This one manages to be a lesson in theology at the same time. Its theme is Pelagius, whose doctrine denies original sin resulting from the fall and claims instead that humans can achieve perfection without a new grace. The grace of free will was sufficient. Consequently, infants did not need to be baptized since they did not bear original sin. Pelagius thought that if sin were inevitable in man because of the fall, it could not be sin, for God could not ask something of man, namely sinlessness, that was humanly impossible. Belloc had no truck with that. Instead, he humorously upholds infallible dogma and flowing beer as the blessings of Christendom. Pelagius lived at Cardinal and taught a doctrine there, how whether you went to heaven or hell it was your own affair. It had nothing to do with the church, my boy, but was your own affair. No, he didn't believe in Adam and Eve, he put no faith therein. His doubts began with the fall of man, and he laughed at original sin. With my ro-ti-to-ti-tiddly-o, he laughed at original sin. Then came the bishop of old Auxerre, Germanus was his name. He tore great handfuls out of his hair, and he called Pelagius shame. And with his stout episcopal staff, so thoroughly whacked and banged, the heretics all, both short and tall, they'd rather had been hanged. Oh, he whacked them hard, and he banged them long, upon each and all occasions, till they bellowed in chorus, loud and strong, their orthodox persuasions, with my ro-ti-to-ti-oddly-o, their orthodox persuasions. Now the faith is old, and the devil bold, exceedingly bold indeed, and the masses of doubt that are floating about would smother a mortal creed. But we that sit in a sturdy youth, and still can drink strong ale, let us put it away to infallible truth, that always shall prevail, and thank the Lord for the temporal sword and howling heretics too, and all good things our Christendom brings, but especially barley brew. My ro-ti-to-ti-oddly-o, especially barley. A rather poor recording can be found below or in the Substack post, although it is a bit different from the version I know and would love to record someday, which goes just about like this. Well, Pelagius lived at Cardinal and taught a doctrine there, how whether you went to heaven or hell it was your own affair. It had nothing to do with the church, my boy, but was your own affair. No, he didn't believe in Adam and Eve, he put no faith therein. His doubts began with the fall of man, and he laughed at original sin. With my ro-ti-to-ti-iddly-o, he laughed at original sin. Or something along those lines. As kingfishers catch fire. The fourth poem in this collection is another Hopkins masterwork. This poem displays Hopkins' sympathy to Duns Scotus' philosophy of haec cheitas, Latin for thisness. In contradistinction to Aquinas and other scholastics, Scotus emphasized the irreducible individuality of things as their essence, instead of viewing their essence as more properly derived from the genus or type of thing they were. For example, Scotus would have said that the essence of a man named Bill was best or primarily captured in the fact that he was this man, with his own particular history, hair color, likes and dislikes, insight and ignorance. Aquinas would have said that the essence of Bill was that he was a particular type of thing, a member of the human species, a male of that species, of a particular country, etc. And so would have seen this essence not so much in his individuality as in his belonging to a particular species or genus of thing, all the members of which shared certain defining characteristics. A fuller account would have to have an article all to itself. The important thing in all of this for our poet, though, is that the magic of God's creation is revealed in individuals as individuals. Each individual person or animal speaks and spells wonder by being itself first, not primarily by being member of a species. We marvel and delight in the individual more than in the abstraction we are able to make of its belonging to a type. Existence finds tongue to fling out broad its name, and as for kingfishers and dragonflies, so for man, but better, since he is made in the image of God. For the just man to justice, a verb, is in fact for Christ to Christ, as a verb. That is, be Christ in the Father's eyes. The man in a state of sanctifying grace acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring. Like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bows swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells, selves, goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, What I do is me, for that I came. I say more. The just man justices, keeps grace that keeps all his goings graces. It's in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. Chatting with my friend Augustine, a sophomore at Wyoming Catholic College, and for whom this poem was his introduction to poetry, we see how Hopkins in the second stanza shows man in relation to himself, and then in relation to God, and finally in relation to community. Justice can be seen as man in right relation to himself. Justice is also operative in man's right relation to God. And finally, man in 10,000 places is man seen in relation to his fellow men, as imaging Christ both to them and to the Father. Somehow Hopkins uses very particular images to express very general concepts. The stones that ring could be understood as ringing in the sense of sounding when knocked together, but also as making concentric rings in the well water they splash into. It's clear this poem is meant for reading out loud. You can hear the ringing of stones and bells in the ings of the consecutive string, hung, swung, tongue, and fling. The bow of the bell is the base of the bell where the tongue of the bell hits it. The roundy well sounds like the echo of a well. In all this, we see Hopkins tying together the sound and signification of words to wring out the greatest possible meaning. Ring both indicates and sounds like the reality he is trying to convey. Truly a ringing of the word. As a side note, kingfishers are a rare sight in Wyoming, although they do live there. Small, incredibly fast, shy, they live near less frequented water sources. I once saw one flash over the river that runs through Lander. What struck me more than the color, I wasn't close enough to see much besides the fact that it was a kingfisher, was the incredible speed with which it flew down the avenue of trees that lined the river. Try and see a kingfisher someday if you've never had that chance before. Resurrected, but still Joseph's son. This is the most modern poem of our five. Attributed to a Sister Mary Otta OSJ, it has been widely shared on the internet. I've searched extensively and have been unable to dig up any biographical information about the author. I suspect she was a religious sister of the 40s or 50s, whose one poem became popular, and little or no record of her survives. That is rather fitting, I suppose, for one who is writing about Saint Joseph, the hidden saint. I include it in the top 5 with a little bit of trepidation, given its relative obscurity, but you can judge for yourself whether or not it is a masterful and imaginative work that accomplishes what I spoke about at the beginning, the stirring of wonder at familiar sights, or even concepts and biblical events, as in this case. In the splendor of the resurrection, Christ did not lose his humanity. The uncreated Word of God's created humanity, now immortal, he still loved his father and mother. It needs little commentary, but do read it out loud to someone. That is how I first heard it, and poetry was meant to be heard more than read. Limbo by Sister Mary Otta. The ancient grayness shifted, suddenly and thinned, like mist upon the moors before a wind. An old, old prophet lifted a shining face and said, "He will be coming soon. The Son of God is dead. He died this afternoon." A murmurous excitement stirred all souls. They wondered if they dreamed, save one old man who seemed not even to have heard. And Moses, standing, hushed them all to ask if any had a welcome song prepared. If not, would David take the task? And if they cared, Could not the three young children sing the Benedicite, the canticle of praise they made when God kept them from perishing in the fiery blaze? The breath of spring surprised them, stilling Moses' words. No one could speak, remembering the first fresh flowers, the little singing birds. Still others thought of fields new plowed, or apple trees all blossom bowed, or some the way a dried bed fills with water, laughing down green hills. The fisher folk dreamed of the foam on bright blue seas. The one old man who had not stirred remembered home. And there he was, splendid as the morning sun and fair as only God is fair. And they, confused with joy, knelt to adore, seeing that he wore 5 crimson stars he never had before. No canticle at all was sung, none toned a psalm or raised a greeting song. A silent man alone of all that throng found tongue, not any other. Close to his heart, when the embrace was done, old Joseph said, "How is your mother? How is your mother, son?" My concluding comment on these poems is memorize them. I can't claim I've got them all memorized yet, but that is my goal. Memorization of poetry internalizes the art and makes it your own in a way nothing else can, and you can draw on it at any time, for your own delight and that of others. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my work here on my dad's Tradition and Sanity Substack, please consider giving me a small tip via my buymeacoffee.com page, where you can make a one-time or recurring donation to support my writing. Thank you so much for listening to Tradition and Sanity.